Good morning, everybody from Berlin. I'm very happy that there are so many participants at this webinar today, and especially considering the fact that I've heard that there's not just representatives from South Africa, but also from other countries of Southern Africa, such as Namibia, Zambia, Malawi. There's also participants here from Madagascar and DRC, which is great. And as Mareike has already said, for me, it's special to do this webinar because I used to live in South Africa for many years. And so it's always great to speak to representatives from this region, especially on this topic that we are speaking about today. And with that, I would like to also get into my presentation and briefly speak about what you will expect from us today in the course of this webinar. Now, we are very much looking forward to get into a dialogue with you on the topic of putting human rights due diligence into practice. And I did hear that the German Chamber of Commerce sent out a questionnaire actually in advance to this webinar to ask whether you as a participant have already heard about the regulatory developments that are happening currently here in Europe around putting human rights due diligence into practice, but also other legal developments in the sphere of sustainable supply chain management. And a lot of you as the participants have said that that you have not heard about these legal developments so far, which is understandable because those developments are quite recent. So of course, now with this webinar, we aim to raise awareness on this topic today and give an overview of what's happening and why there are such legal developments in the EU and also other parts of this world. However, our focus is going to be the German Supply Chain Act, as well as the CSDDD, which is the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Now, we're, of course, going to speak about what these developments mean for the companies that fall directly under the scope of these legislations. So this means especially German and European companies, but we'll also speak about what they need to do in terms of their collaboration with suppliers in other parts of this world and how they need to ensure sustainable purchasing practices. And then we're going to change the perspective, and we're also going to speak, of course, then what this indirectly means for suppliers, for instance, in Southern Africa, if they have business relationships with European buyers, and give you the tools to equip yourself if you get requests from European buyers to provide information on ESG management, for instance, and work with them on these topics, as well as trying to show you, of course, that this can also be a competitive advantage for companies that already do have a sound ESG management when they are exporting to the EU. Yes, so my colleague Diana Heinzer will give an overview of these questions in the webinar today. And as has been noted, we will touch then upon specific aspects of the implementation of due diligence processes in 2 further webinars in the coming weeks. So stay tuned. We hope that you will join those webinars as well. And we are here for your questions. We would like to emphasize that we aim to get into a dialogue here from your perspectives, from your experiences on these topics. So please do, remember to post your questions in the chat. We will monitor that as we are speaking and then respond in the Q&A session later on. Now, as a very brief introduction on us as the German Help Desk on Business and Human Rights, so that you know who we are, as well as who you are speaking to. Now, we are a support offered by the German government for companies to help them with the development of human rights and environmental due diligence processes and the establishment of sustainable supply chains. We are not directly German government, but we are government funded. So this means that all of the support services that we provide for companies are completely free of charge. Now, what does this support consist of. We offer free advisory services for companies. We have different training programs available. We have a lot of events and webinars on these topics. And abroad, we thereby work very closely with our colleagues, for instance, from the Agency for Business and Economic Development, as well as the Import Promotion Desk. Colleagues such as Mareike, who are business scouts at the Agency for Business and Economic Development at German Chambers of Commerce abroad. And last but not least, we also have a lot of online tools available that are all also completely freely accessible. You find them on our website, and importantly, they are not only available in German, but also in English. And they help companies as they embark on their journey towards more sustainable supply chains and the implementation of human rights and environmental due diligence processes. I might have time to touch on one of these online tools, at least today, depending on how we are with time, but I will definitely show all of these online tools in the later webinars that will happen in the next few weeks. Yes, I hope to show you how these can also be a resource to you as you are engaging with these topics. And with this short intro, I would now like to hand over to my colleague, Jana Heinze.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today to explore the critical intersection of business and human rights and its impact on you, suppliers or companies in Africa. And thank you very much, Mareike, for the very kind introduction. So my name is Jana. I'm working as an external advisor and trainer for business and human rights. So today we will together dive into how responsible business practices can actually foster a fairer and more inclusive supply chain in Africa, ensuring that human rights are respected and long-term partnerships are built on the foundation of equity and sustainability. But to get started and to familiarize yourself with the topic of human rights, we're going to take a look at some pictures. So we brought some pictures for you, and we want to jointly discover the risks that they are showing. So please take a look at the first two pictures. Jenny's going to show them now. And please tell me and write it in the chat, what human rights risk are you thinking of when you see the first picture on the left?
The crowd has gone a bit silent.
Any ideas? Please be brief. There's no right or wrong.
You can write it in the chat because all of you at the moment are muted and without a camera. So just put your guesstimate in there if you like. Or maybe, Jana, you want to give some ideas, some clues what it could be about?
Maybe I will start to give you some ideas for the first two, and then maybe we start with the second round then. So on the left side on the picture, I do see a man. There. See, sometimes you just have to wait. There is someone, so the first one, not being able to understand each other due to different language and culture, sexist comments. The second one goes into the right direction. So what I see here, what we want to show you is a typical situation that you may find at your workplace, in your company. So it could be a job interview or a promotion interview, and you see a male person interviewing a female. And it could be some sort of discrimination because of gender, race, religious background, not cultural differences. So I think the answer already got into the right direction from Melissa. Thank you very much. So the second one on the right is a little bit more trickier. I have to admit that. You see a person holding a passport and checking the passport, and we do not know what happens after the person received the passport. And we see another job interviewer, applicant, or maybe an employee of the company. So what could be what could be the human rights risk we are thinking of? So what happens if someone keeps your passport? Yep, exactly. Taking possession of the employee's passport. That is exactly the actual human rights risk, because kind of like it takes away the freedom of movement from you. And sometimes in modern forms of slavery, bonded labor, for example, in India, but also in some sectors in Germany, we do see that companies take the passports of their employees and force them, for example, to work or to work more, so they're not free to move. Yeah, so very good. Thank you, Melissa. Okay, second slide. Do I see it already? Yeah, perfect. So to the left. Maybe some of you can familiarize or know how the lady on the left feels. So what do we say here? What do we see on these two pictures? Being overworked, yeah. I see a raised hand from Munia. If you can, feel free to post your answer in the chat. Being overworked, unsupportive work environment. Yep. Being overwhelmed. Stephanie. Understaffed. Yes, understaffed and overworked, long hours, low pay. Right. Exactly. Exactly. So we kind of like move more into the direction of emotional well-being, health and safety at the workplace. And also, if you see who's holding the money, it's a woman. Yeah. So we also kind of like think maybe of low pay, but due to the fact that you're a woman. So then we talk about the specific gender pay gap problem that occurs very much in almost every country in Germany, in Europe, for example. So this is something also very typical for Europe. So we see like also health and safety issues are, you can see them under the umbrella of human rights, and also the topic of wages and unfair wages. Next slide, please. On the left, we move to African country that is called Guinea. I don't know if you guys are familiar with some raw materials that Guinea has. Yep, unsafe work conditions. Exactly. What we see on the left is a typical mining site, lack of safety. Yep, health and safety. Exactly. So mining is a typical sector that covers a high risk of health and safety issues. You see here, what we see here is a bauxite mining, a raw material that is very common in Guinea. The automotive industry needs it desperately, and also other industries. And unfortunately, due to the high environmental impact, it's not only the health and safety issues, but also blocks and pollutes waterways. Sometimes local residents and local communities, villages need to be replaced because under their village there is a mining site. Exploiting of labor, Utsani, exactly. Sometimes we see it not with bauxite mining, but with cobalt mining, for example, or mica mining in India. There is a problem of child labor as well. Yeah. So, and to the right, we see some money. I don't know if only I see it, but for me it's showing that no, it's activated. There you go. Yeah, not being paid a living wage. Very good. Already the correct answer, and also using the right word like living wage. And bribery also. Yeah, bribery is also a very good corruption. So if we're talking about wages, yeah, then sometimes, unfortunately, wages are failing to pay a decent wage, yeah, or they are under the local minimum wage, or the minimum wage, and now the living wage comes in, is way too low to meet the criteria for a living wage. So you're not earning enough money to actually that you can actually live or provide for you and your family. So very good. These are the human rights risks we are talking of. Next slide, please. And this is the last one. What kind of human rights risk are you thinking of when you see these pictures? Safety. Yep. Yeah, health and safety at the workplace. Here we see some chemicals stored in probably not the correct way. Safety regulations, safety exactly. We do see at least that the women showing in the pictures are wearing gloves and some kind of like a vest. So these pictures actually show that there's some kind of like personal protective equipment. Yeah, we call it PPE, that helps you to prevent accidents, injuries. But unfortunately, again, here, not all of the companies working or like being in the sectors that working with chemicals or in the production do offer their employees enough protective equipment. So very good. Also the link to environmental risk. Thank you very much. Health risk from Prelang, but also pollution of the environment, exactly, around the operations that could have impacts on communities. Think of, for example, production of medicine, yeah, of pharmaceutical companies, plants in India, and the rivers that are close to the, close to the factory side. Also there in the past, rivers were polluted, and then again, the fresh water for the communities nearby the production site were polluted. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for engaging with us with these little quiz, a little riddle on human rights risk. Next slide, please. So I think you already got the idea why we're showing you like so many different kind of pictures. So we want to show you that the topic of business and human rights, and also the German Supply Chain Act, and also the CSDDD, the European regulation, does not only cover like the most severe human rights impacts like child labor and forced labor, this settlement of local communities, but also focused on human rights risks like discrimination, adequate working hours, adequate wages, salaries. So it's kind of like a really broad spectrum of protected human rights. That's why this topic is also highly relevant for European countries. So it's not only that we are looking at our supply chain, it's also like the protected human rights are also very violent in Germany. The next slide, please. You see that not only human rights are protected by the current regulation or will be protected by the European regulation, it's also environmental obligations. With the German Supply Chain Act, we kind of like picked three, and you see like these little orangey sort of like pictures are the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. I heard that many of you are from the agriculture sector, so I think you might be familiar with that, and also the Convention on Mercury and on hazardous waste. But you see that kind of like the European regulation, these are like the more whitish frames. They like broaden the topic and widen and broadened, and it shapes the content of the supply chain a bit more. So what I want you to keep in mind for now is that yes, we do cover a lot of human rights with the current regulation. It's not only the most severe ones, it's also topics like discrimination, the topics like well-being, health and safety, but of course also forms like child labor, bonded labor that might occur, for example, in countries like China. Next slide, please. So now we're gonna like deep dive into the key insights of the German Supply Chain Act and give you a brief outlook also on the CSDDD compliance. So next slide, please. I think probably every presentation that we are doing and every training that we're doing, we kind of like always start with this slide on the global legal and political developments, because sometimes we do get like the critical question from like a critical audience or someone who's just getting started, is it worth it that I engage in this topic? Is it worth it that I, invest resources to build a team for that? Is it just not maybe something that, will go away, maybe with a new government or because we have more urgent problems? And then we kind of like want to show you these kind of like sort of time frame, because it shows that this topic is not the new kid on the block or the kid that will most likely go away in a couple of years, because we're coming already from a long history. So what you see here is like in recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the need to regulate the intersection of business operations and human rights. Historically, to be honest, businesses have more focused primarily on the profitability, often at the expense of labor rights, environmental standards, and community welfare. However, international frameworks such as the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the UNGPs, you see them on the far left, 2011, have already established more than 10 years ago that companies must respect human rights throughout their operations and supply chains. These frameworks are like the foundation for everything that followed. The German Supply Chain Act, the French Act, and also the European regulation. But at this time in 2011, it was on a voluntary basis. So we kind of like wanted to start it with that to see how companies react on that and how they set up their human rights due diligence system. Governments were then, because some sort of like this voluntary approach didn't really work out in the end. So governments are now and were increasingly introducing regulations to ensure that businesses uphold these responsibilities that were kind of like laid on in the UN Guiding Principles. And these includes mandatory human rights due diligence in some regions. For example, you see UK, France, Australia, the Netherlands, and all of these laws have in common, that they require companies to first identify, second prevent, and three address human rights abuses linked to their activities. And such regulations not only protect vulnerable communities, but also drive companies towards a more sustainable and ethical practices, ensuring that human rights become a central concern in global commerce. So on the next slide, you see our main sort of like regulation right now in Germany, the German Supply Chain Act. It's also called the Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz. In German, a very long word. Even for Germans, it's a very long word, and we do love long words in German. Which came into effect on January 1st, 23. And it mandates large companies. I think that's what you have to keep in mind. Large companies for us are companies over 1,000 employees in Germany to take responsibility for human rights and also environmental standards throughout their supply chains. So it's not only for the company side in Germany and their employees and maybe their gender pay gap, but it's also like their supply chains are integrated in the approach. And it requires businesses to identify, assess, address, what is that? Risks such as child labor, forced labor, environmental harm, and other abuses at all stages of their production process, both domestically and internationally. So the law aims to ensure that companies operating in Germany contribute to sustainable and ethical practices globally, so not only in Germany, by implementing due diligence obligations. And we're gonna, like within these 3-part series that we're kind of like want to do with you together, we're gonna like deep dive into each and every due diligence obligations for you, but also for the companies in Germany. So you're not obliged to do that, but you're some sort of like the sparring partner for German companies, and they need your help. Let me put it that way. They need their help, your help, to do the risk management, to set up preventive measures, and to also maybe, enable remedial actions. And non-compliance for German companies can result in fines and penalties. That's why they're so eager to work with you and to ensure that this is not going to happen. So the material scope we already discovered during the, little riddle with the pictures. So it's the material scope, like I said, broadened. So it's not only the most severe, but also topics like non-discrimination. The next slide, please. So we do not only have like these movement in Germany, we also had like for the ongoing last, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years, the developments on the EU level. So the key points of the CSDDD, so the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So if If you hear CSEEE, you always know like this is the correct regulation. So the CSEEE is the proposed EU regulation that seeks to enhance corporate responsibility by, again, same, requiring companies to identify, prevent, and mitigate adverse human rights and environmental impacts. Under these directives, large EU and non-EU companies operating in the EU must conduct due diligence to ensure compliance with sustainable and ethical practices, again, child labor, forced labor, environmental degradation, and other violations. If you directly compare the German Supply Chain Act and the EU regulation, kind of like stands out that the CSEEE also includes provision on climate change mitigation and corporate governance, aiming to hold businesses accountable for sustainability and human rights issues, again, throughout their operations. So if you compare these two, it's kind of like the CSEEE is not something new for the German companies. It's more spelled out. It's more shaping the LKSG content. It gives it more contour, let me put it that way. So it kind of like a little widened and broadened, but for German companies, it's more or less the same human rights due diligence that they're already performing under the LKSG, the German Supply Chain Act. So this is the key points of the regulation. Next slides. And you're like, okay, but why is this interested for me? Yeah, because I'm not a German company. What does this have to do with me? Because, to be honest, there are effects on companies outside the scope. So first, I think it's fair to say what you don't have to do, because sometimes in the discussion that kind of like gets a little mixed up, because sometimes also in Germany, German companies tell their smaller suppliers, no, if you want to work with me, you also obliged to, follow the rules of the German Supply Chain Act, which is not inherently true. So if you're not a German company and if you're outside the scope of the German regulations, there are no legal effects according to the Supply Chain Act. So no reporting obligation towards the authority or towards the German authority. There's no risks for you of sanctions, and there's also no obligation for you to collaborate. And the mere transfer of obligations, also something that companies might try on you, is not permitted. But what we see is that German companies do need your help because they need to perform a risk analysis, for example, in their South African supply chains, or they might want to work with local suppliers, or they might want to use a certain standard or certification. So there might be a need for German companies, let me put it that way, there's no obligation for you, but a need for German companies, European companies, to be fair, from next year on, to collaborate with you in their risk analysis, when it comes to measures, and also when it comes to the complaints procedure, because they're responsible for the complete supply chain, or when it comes to the EU regulation, their chain of activities. So cultivation, production, logistics, shipping, and also the sales. So that's why they need your collaboration, because it's not a German regulation focusing only on Germany, but focusing on the supply chains of German companies, and you might be part of them. Yeah. So if you're working with European clients, yeah, this is a topic that sooner or later, I would assume, will land on your desk. Right now, German companies are more or less focusing on their first tier. These might be companies that are also based in Germany or in the European Union, but with the CSEEE that focused on the severe risk, focused to go deeper in the supply chain, I think you guys will be also in the focus of the risk analysis. So next slide, please. So the possible effects on you, the suppliers. So what will actually happen? Yeah, in our experience, what we already see in Germany, and we do speak also with a lot of suppliers from maybe Asian countries. So what do we see already? What is happening and what can you expect? Yeah, so there will be a higher request for information, transparency, and there might be questionnaires coming. So the buyers, your clients, will ask you, suppliers, for information about your workers, your products, your own supply chain, your own measurements, maybe when it comes to health and safety, your own wage situation. So they kind of like want to know what's going on in their supply chain, to put it very, very short. Yeah. But also the buyers might have, and we do see that already when it comes to Asian countries, where it can change the what might to will, have increased expectations regarding human rights. So they will judge suppliers or potential suppliers also according to their responsibilities. And so the supplier regarding human rights and environmental standards will rise. And if you want to be the supplier of choice for European companies, I think it would be smart to get started now. You don't have to be perfect. Yeah, it's not about perfection. No German company is perfect. Yeah, let's be honest. But it's about showing progress, and it's about showing that you really engage with this topic. There also might be new contract clauses. Yeah, contracts could be expanded to include a commitment by the supplier to, for example, respect human rights. There also might be checks that will be carried out at your side, whether the supplier, you or the potential supplier, is respecting human rights and meeting the requirements. Remedial action, when human rights violations are found in the supply chains, then the buyer also will need to take steps to end it. And last but not least, that's what I said before, buyers will need the cooperation of the supplier. So it's also a good momentum to engage with the European clients and to show them that you're already kind of like ahead of the game and already know about this regulation and that you're offering your help. Next slide, please. So how can you prepare? And this is only one slide, but this will be like the key topic of our webinar series 2 and 3. So to already make a little, advertisement for round 2 and 3. So how you can, prepare yourself. So it's always good to understand your buyer's due diligence obligation. And this is actually the topic of today. We're gonna go step by step through these, what we call the circle of due diligence obligations of European companies. So you understand what your buyer or your client need to do in order to understand where you come in. Because they're kind of like, points where it's like, very logical that you come in, risk analysis, preventive measures. So you be, able to help him to fulfill this human rights obligation. So it's always good to understand and know the human rights obligations. Then I think it's always smart and would be a recommendation, assign someone, appoint someone, a contact point for customer requests. So you have someone already prepared, trained, maybe also a little advertisement for module 2 and 3, So engage also with the training and to really, have good staff on board that is aware of the regulations, already know, the terms and what they need from you. Then prepare for information request. I think this is like your main task if you want to, engage in this topic. Again, you are not obliged to, but I think it's smart to do it. So this is at the heart of every human rights due diligence obligation. So stress, and I cannot stress the importance enough. So to minimize your risk, you have to have, a basic understanding of your risk. So understand and name your environmental and social risk in your own operations and supply chains, but also ask your buyers for help where you need it. If you need to go deeper in the supply chain, training, resources, Again, it's a continuous learning journey, but I think it's good to understand basically what are you doing? No company starts from zero in this case. So this is also something that I want to, already state now. You will already have a lot of things in place, But it's in this part of the journey, it's that you, kind of like make it transparent for your client what you're already doing. So these are kind of like the steps how you can prepare. So assign a contact point, do your own risk analysis. We will practice that in module, not a model, in our webinar number 2, kind of like already getting mixed up. So during our next session, we will conduct together a risk analysis. So step by step what you have to do. And then we're also going to take about measures that you can already take. That will be our webinar number 3. And this is basically what you can do. You're super well prepared and equipped for this when you join our series. Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to deep dive into the point of the possible effects on suppliers, but the human rights obligations of your clients. So next slide, please. So the implementation of due diligence obligations in practice. And giving the time, bear with me, I might be a little quicker on one slide or the other, but also because I know that we will do a deep dive, in webinar number 2 and 3. Okay. Okay, I think this was not a question, that was just something someone unmuted. Okay, next slide, please. So there's one thing, and this is sort of like the underlying principle of the German Supply Chain Act and also the European regulation. What the government really wants from the company is a change of perspective. Again, like I said, in the past and historically, companies have focused primarily on profitability and focused themselves on the company. And the classical risk management were always, what are the effects of surroundings on the company, market, liquidity, reputational risks. Unfortunately, often at the expense of labor rights, environmental standards, and the community welfare. So what the regulations basically wants from the European companies is a change of perspective. So now, please, German company, put yourself in the shoes of the vulnerable groups in your company and in your supply chain. So what are the effects of the company, the core activities, the procurement, on the surroundings, the environment, and the people? And then you put the people at the center of this regulation. And this is a very important change of perspective, because it's not about reputational risks anymore. It's about the risks for the people. Next slide, please. And you see in our little circle of human rights due diligence, kind of like an ongoing, continuous journey. So be prepared, it will never end. It's kind of like ongoing. So you have the consideration of the interest of affected persons very much at the heart of these due diligence obligations in the German Supply Chain Act. In the European regulation, it's even an own human rights due diligence, sort of like sorted out from the center approach, and same level than, for example, a risk analysis. Here we have it at the center. So in each and every step, you have to integrate it. So what do European, for now, German companies have to do? So there's one point about strategy and implementation. So they are, obliged to set up an appropriate and effective risk management systems. And this must be embedded, in every relevant business processes. There also need to be clear responsibilities for the risk management. For example, many companies now have a human rights officer. This is also something new. And also you might be approached by this human rights officer, or you will be approached from the purchasing department of your German clients, saying like, okay, we've worked together for the last couple of maybe 5 years, 10 years, or, oh, you want to be a new supplier for our company? We do have something new here, and this is called the German Supply Chain Act. And we need to check, in order for us to see if there are risks with our supplies, we need to see how you perform. So this, could be your already involvement that, certain functions in the company, more or less likely the purchasing department, will contact you to ask you for more information, purchasing, or even the human rights officer. Next slide, please. Okay, now I think we can click. So what does it mean? The second one, and this is like my favorite, very much my favorite human rights obligation is the risk analysis. If you're doing a good risk analysis, you are so well prepared to fulfill these requirements, but you need to do it, and and this is not an exercise that you can easily do on a Thursday afternoon. This is something that takes time, that needs some deep work also in your organization and in your supply chain. So what does it actually mean? And this is something, again, that also I think would be something that I would like to recommend to every company, to perform a risk analysis, not only for the companies that are obliged to do it, the German and European companies, but also for you. If you're working in a supply chain, I think it's always good to know what's going on in your own company and also what is going on in your supply chain. So what does it basically mean? It means that you have to have procedures in place throughout your company to identify, evaluate, and prioritize risks and violations in your own business area and in your supply chain. Risks for the people, again, not for the company. Focus on the potential, particularly vulnerable groups. Typically, vulnerable groups are women, migrant workers, disabled people, yeah, people who need some sort of like extra layer of protection, or very vulnerable for human rights violation, what we have seen in the past. So this is like very short form of a risk analysis. Next slide, please. This is again my favorite picture to show that, because you always start broad. Please keep in mind, we are never afraid of risks. Each and every company I worked with in the past has human rights risk. This is nothing to be ashamed of. This is nothing that you know, some sort of like bad remark for your company. Every company has risks, yeah? And you start with a very broad picture in the abstract risk analysis, and you kind of like start look very broad view, what could be potential risks for my company, the area that I'm operating with, the products that I'm selling, the products that I'm producing, the raw materials are coming from where, who's in my supply chain. So it's really some sort of like a mapping of your company, of your products, and like a vague picture of your supply chain. Yeah. So this is always the first step. And then you may have, you know, risks like in your own company, you might have risk in your supply chain. For example, take a car. Yeah. A car has so many different parts that it's, you know, making the car. You have a battery, you may have the leather for the seats, you know, you have the whole, you know, outer part. And then you sort of like go down. It's like, okay, what do we need for the battery? What do we need for the leather? Where are these, you know, raw materials coming from? So it's kind of like you see where are the risks, and then you sort of like narrow it down and work with your own suppliers, and you check with your suppliers, okay, so there might be a potential risk, but is this risk really occurring in your company? So it's sort of like narrowing it down to make it more handy for you, and yeah, to identify the risks in your supply chain. Next slide, please. So how do you do that? How do you identify the actual risk? And again, this is something that we will cover in the next webinar, and not model, in the next webinar. So which risks and violations actually occur in your own business area and in your supply chain? You do interviews with employees, consultations with NGOs, and also the information from suppliers. And again, next slide, please. This is where you come in. So the German or European company needs the information, needs the collaboration in the risk analysis, and they will request sometimes a lot of information. This is the first time. Sometimes not all of the information is really necessary for them to know. So just be aware that sometimes they just send out, you know, the same questionnaire to each and every company in their supply chain. Just double check. It's like, okay, what do you need from me? What is the risk that you're associating with me? How can I help you? Is it for my own company? Do I need to take a look back in my supply chain? Might be some steps, you know, how the products come to me, where the raw materials are coming from. So kind of like engage some sort of like a joint look at the supply chain of the product. Again, there is no obligation to collaborate, but I think specifically at this part, I do understand the need of German companies, you know, when you're sitting somewhere in Hamburg or in Munich and you need to, you know, deep dive into the supply chain in Africa. For example, imagine you're sitting in Stuttgart, you're a BMW, and you want to know where the cobalt comes from. You need to engage with the local mining industry. You need to engage with local NGOs. You need to engage with the workers, you know, to really understand what's going on. Next slide, please. So if you identified your risks, yeah, so you know, for example, again, you're a BMW, you're in Munich, you're the purchasing manager, and you know, I do have problems in the cobalt supply chain, for example. I do have problems in the leather supply chain. Not only the leather, but also like the coloring of the leather that may take place in Morocco. Or I have problems with the engineering, yeah, you know, these little, I mean, modern cars are like modern, you know, the technology is for me, always pretty amazing. So, but they might come from Taiwan, yeah? And I do also see problems in Taiwan or in China, yeah? So again, you identified risks, and now you have to tackle these risks. It's like knowing and showing, yeah? Knowing your risk, showing that you're doing something in order to tackle these risks. So minimize risk with preventive measures. And again, next slide, please. This is also something where German companies or European companies might approach you because they need collaboration. They might send out new contracts to you for you to sign them, you know? Herewith confirm that I do not have any kind of human rights violations in my supply chain. German companies like to use this phrase. It's not very smart to ask someone that, but again, yeah, new contract clauses, they're smart ones. They're more like, no, but again, here, there might be new contract clauses. They might also ask you for training, you know, if they're not sure, if, you know, if there's a risk in your company, or they might ask you to train your supplier. So they're kind of like a combination of methods to combine, yeah, tackle the risks. Sometimes companies also ask for certifications. Some products carry like a standard, like the fair trade standard, for example, just like, you know, to show that this product was produced in a very sustainable way. Yeah. Also, this might be something that pops up on your end, a client asking you for a new certificate or standard. So these are kind of like a selection. You can see here, we will share all the slides with you that will, you know, you may be asked to perform. There might be also a wish to conduct an audit on your production side or with your suppliers. So this is also, again, a preventive measure according to the law that German or European companies might ask you to do. Again, we will take a look in our webinar number 3, what kind of like measures do tackle a certain risk. So for you also to understand, is this actually an adequate measure, you know, to put on me, or is someone just like passing on the responsibility? And also what you can actively do, yeah, before even someone asks you to do something, what you can actively do and what you, again, already have in place. We will not start from zero. So don't be, you know, afraid or scared that this, you know, like a wave of new responsibility, a wave of, you know, financial investments or personal investments. Again, most of the companies I work with, no one started from zero. No one. Most of the companies already have HR policies, trainings, health and safety measurements, you know, some environmental protection, personal, you know, security equipment. You never start from zero. We just have to flag it out now for the clients from Europe that this falls under, you know, the jurisdiction of the new EU regulation. Next slide, please. So this is something we can discuss later on. And then there's the third part where European clients probably desperately need your help. So we have risk analysis already. They will ask you, okay, what's going on in your company? Because for them, it's a black box. No? Some case, it's like, okay, I don't know what they're doing. Yeah, I need to understand the supply chain. So I have to ask them, where are the products coming from? Yeah? Again, you know, imagine a car. Or imagine, you know, your supermarket chain in Germany, they want to know where the fruits are coming from, or the cashews are coming from, or the coffee is coming from. They need to understand how's the situation in the production, on the fields, maybe. Yeah? So this risk analysis. Then we have to find measures who matches the risks, because again, it's not bad to have risk. It's bad if you don't do anything, if you don't tackle them. And then the third part is the complaints procedure. And I kind of like to link the risk analysis with the complaints procedure, because they kind of like interact with each other. So the complaints procedures are, you want to know what's going on in your supply chain, and you want to know if something is going on. For example, imagine the first slide that I showed you with the pictures. So for example, you have the job interview situation, and the interviewer discriminated the woman. He said, I'm not going to hire a woman. I'm sorry. This position is reserved for men. Women do less than men. Yeah, happens. So then you want to know what happened in this situation, and then a complaints procedure, yeah, an email address, a telephone call, even a letter. Then someone can write to you and say, like, you know what, I was in an job interview at your company and something went wrong, and I just want to address that with you. So it's, again, please do not be afraid of risk, and please do not be afraid of complaints. Yeah. So the German company may ask you to give your employees, your workers, and in your supply chain an email address, a telephone number, or they want to, maybe a box where someone can throw in the letter, so they know what's going on. So people have the chance to complain, to raise their voices, to raise the workers' voices. That's like the central aim of the complaints procedure. So this is also something where you can help them actually to pass on the, the email address or whatever it is, the complaints procedure to your workers and also in your supply chain. Next slide, please. Yeah, collaboration in complaints procedures. I already touched upon that. So again, obliged companies need information of potentially affected persons, yeah, and their situation to design an effective complaints procedure. So again, this is something where they need your help. Next slide, please. Yep. And here we are already, kind of like I speed up. I hopefully it was not too fast. So maybe just to put everything that I said, I know it was already a lot of information, to put it in a nutshell. So in light of new legal obligation and increased requirements, German companies, European companies now must take proactive steps to ensure compliance with these new regulations. And that would be our recommendations. Yeah, get ready now, because the sooner the later they will come to you and ask for your help, to collaborate in order to fulfill these human rights obligations, because companies do play a key role in practical implementation. You play a key role in the practical implementation. So by recognizing and leveraging opportunities, businesses can position themselves as the supplier of choice in their industry. But do not be afraid. I know sometimes when you hear this for the first time and you're like, oof, so what is going on now? I would like to emphasize that recognize your opportunities to become the supplier of choice. And this is something that I would like to address in the direction also of Mareike, help is out there. Yeah, tools and support services are available to help navigate these changes that might occur now in your company. And I think I can speak also in the name of Mareike and her colleagues. And I already heard that also some embassies are here, the governments and some DGIZ. So don't hesitate to reach out to your local partners. Yeah, for example, to the local German Chamber of Commerce for assistance. I think get ready now and stay ahead of the game. That would be my last statement. And that's it. I'm going to stop here because we want to have some times for questions.